I never thought I'd see the day when my brother, the man who stole my wife, would walk back into our family home like nothing had happened. But 4 years later, there he was, smug, successful, and holding onto my ex like a trophy. What he didn't know was that this time, he wasn't the one in control. Let's rewind a bit. 4 years ago, I thought I had it all. A great job in software development, a wife I loved, and even a cat, Lumi, who ruled our little world. Sarah and I had been together for 5 years, building a life that felt stable, happy, real. Or so I thought. Then came Jake, my older brother, the golden boy of the family. He worked in finance, flashed his wealth around like it was a personality trait, and had a habit of taking what he wanted. Turns out that included my wife. I should have seen the signs. He was always around when I wasn't, dropping comments about how Sarah deserved more. I ignored it. I trusted him. Biggest mistake of my life. The betrayal? Oh, it wasn't subtle. I walked into our favorite restaurant, flowers in hand, planning to surprise my wife. Instead, I found her holding hands with my brother, laughing, whispering, looking at him the way she used to look at me. And when they finally noticed me, Jake had the audacity to smirk and say, "Oh hey bro. We were wondering when you'd figure it out." That moment shattered everything. But the worst part? They didn't just betray me, they mocked me for it. Jake treated it like a game he won, and Sarah? She acted like I was the one being unreasonable. That was the day I lost my wife. But it was also the day I started rebuilding. Fast forward 4 years, I'm thriving. I have a better job, a new life, and most importantly, peace. Jake and Sarah? They thought they were untouchable. They thought they had everything. Until one family dinner changed everything. Jake came home acting like he still ran the show, smirking at me, flaunting my ex, making little digs about how some people can't move on. I stayed quiet. I let him dig his own grave. Because what he didn't know was that Dad had been watching him closely. And that night, Dad dropped the kind of truth that ruined him. Jake wasn't just a backstabbing brother, he was a fraud. That dinner turned into a public execution, and by the end of it, Jake wasn't walking out as the family's golden child. He was walking out as a ruined man. And the best part? I didn't even have to lift a finger. Trust me, you'll want to hear what happened next. If there's one thing you should know about my brother Jake, it's this. He's always been the guy who gets away with everything. Growing up, he was Mom and Dad's favorite, the one they bragged about at family dinners, the one they compared me to whenever they thought I was falling short. Jake was the golden child. I was just there. Even as kids, the difference was clear. Jake was loud, charming, always knew what to say to get people on his side. Me, I was quieter, more reserved, focused on my own thing. I worked hard, got good grades, landed a stable job in software development. Nothing flashy, nothing impressive, just solid, steady work. Jake, on the other hand, went into finance. The kind of job where you make a ton of money and act like you're a genius when all you're really doing is playing with other people's cash. He'd show up to family events in designer suits, parking his overpriced Mercedes like it was a trophy. And he never let me forget it. "Still driving that old Toyota, bro?" he'd say with that smug smirk. "Man, you gotta think bigger. You can't just stay small time forever." I ignored him. Because unlike Jake, I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. And then there was Sarah. I met her in college back when neither of us had much. She was funny, kind, had this way of making life feel lighter. We weren't some flashy power couple. We were just us. Late night takeout, movie marathons, dreaming about the future. We built everything together. Bought a house. Adopted our cat, Lumi. Talked about kids. I thought we were happy. I thought we were solid. But looking back, the cracks had been there for a while. Jake had always been around. Always a little too close, always a little too involved. At first, I chalked it up to him being friendly. He'd swing by when I was working late, chat with Sarah, bring over expensive wine, joke about how she deserved a real night out, instead of just sitting around waiting for me. Sarah would laugh it off. I should have paid more attention. Because Jake wasn't just visiting. He was testing the waters. And I was too blind to see what was happening until it was too late. The night I found out about them started like any other. I was running late from work, stuck in a last-minute meeting, exhausted but excited. Sarah and I had our monthly date night at Romano's, our favorite Italian place. I even stopped to pick up flowers on the way, some stupid romantic impulse. Because I knew she'd had a rough week at work. I walked in, scanning the restaurant for her. And that's when I saw them. Jake, Sarah, sitting in a booth together, his hand on hers, whispering, laughing. At first, my brain didn't register it. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe they just ran into each other. But then Jake saw me. And instead of looking guilty, he smirked. "Oh hey bro," he said, leaning back like he owned the place. "We were wondering when you'd figure it out." I swear time slowed down. The flowers in my hand suddenly felt ridiculous. Sarah didn't even look surprised. She just gave me this calm, almost bored expression, like she had been waiting for this moment. "Jake and we've been seeing each other," she said, like it was nothing. Like she wasn't ripping my heart out in the middle of a damn restaurant. I don't remember what I said next. I just remember the rage. I threw the flowers on the table. The vase tipped over, spilling water everywhere. I barely noticed. I was too busy staring at my brother. My brother. The one person who should have had my back. "You had to know this was coming," Jake said, acting like this was some business deal he was closing. "Sarah deserves more than..." I don't even remember moving. 1 second he was talking. The next, I shoved him so hard he nearly fell over. The restaurant staff got between us before it could escalate further, but I didn't care. I was done. Done with him. Done with her. I walked out and never looked back. That night, I sat at home with Lumi curled up on my lap, listening to the silence of a life that had been ripped apart. And the worst part? Neither of them even pretended to be sorry. Sarah moved in with Jake the next day. They sent me texts like I was supposed to just accept it. Like I was supposed to be okay with it. "Things happen," Jake wrote. "You'll thank me later." We all know she was meant for someone like me. Sarah's message was even worse. "I was going to tell you eventually," she wrote. Jake and I just clicked. He has ambition, you know? Goals. You're happy with your little programming job and your cat. I need more than that. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. But that night, sitting in that empty house, I made myself a promise. I would move on. I would rebuild. And one day they would regret everything. For years passed. I won't lie, it took time to put myself back together. At first, I felt like I had lost everything. But then, slowly things started getting better. I poured myself into my work. Got promoted. Got a raise. Moved into a better house. I stopped answering family calls, stopped showing up to holiday events. Lumi stayed with me. She became my one constant. Meanwhile, Jake and Sarah were living large. Posting their perfect life all over social media. Vacations, fancy cars, expensive dinners. But something felt off. Sarah stopped posting as much. Their smiles started looking more forced. And then one day Jake came home. I should have seen it coming. Mom called me, telling me she wanted a big family dinner. "Jake has some big news," she said, her voice all excited. I almost said no. But something told me to go. Because deep down I knew. Jake wasn't coming home to celebrate. He was coming home because his world was about to fall apart. And when I walked into that dining room and saw the way he looked at me, nervous like he knew I knew something he didn't, I realized that this was it. The night everything would change. I walked into my parents' house for the first time in years, and the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Jake was already there, sitting at the dining table, looking way less polished than usual. He still had the expensive suit, but something was off. The usual cocky smirk wasn't there. He looked tired. Sarah sat beside him, shifting uncomfortably. She wasn't wearing any of the fancy designer stuff she used to show off online. Mom and Dad were acting normal, too normal. Mom kept trying to make conversation, but Dad was quiet, just watching. I wasn't stupid. Something was wrong. Jake cleared his throat, trying to sound casual. "So, how's life treating you, man? Still doing the whole IT thing?" I leaned back in my chair. "Yeah. Running my own department now. Good money, flexible hours." His jaw tightened for half a second before he forced a smile. "That's great. Really great." Sarah barely looked at me. For the first time in years, she seemed embarrassed. So what's this big family meeting about? I asked, looking at Dad. That's when he pulled out the folder. Thick, heavy, full of documents. Dad set it on the table between us and exhaled through his nose. Jake, want to explain why the company's finances don't add up? Boom. Jake's whole body tensed. What? What do you mean? Dad flipped open the folder, pulling out the first sheet. The Anderson contract, $2.4 million. Our books only show $1.8 million. That's a $600,000 difference. Want to tell me where it went? Sarah went pale. Jake swallowed hard. I just sat there watching him sweat through his expensive suit. There must be a mistake, Jake stammered. I'll have accounting look into it. Dad slid more documents across the table. Already did. And it's not just Anderson. It's Wilson. It's the Chapman Project. Hell, it's over 20 contracts. You've been stealing from the company, Jake. Silence. Jake's face twitched. He was panicking. Dad, come on. It's not like that. Dad's voice was sharp. Then explain it. Right now. Sarah shifted in her seat. She knew. I let out a small chuckle, shaking my head. This was it. The moment where Jake's perfect little world started falling apart. And I was going to enjoy every second of it. Jake tried to keep it together. He really did. He started throwing out excuses, clerical errors, miscommunication, accounting issues. But Dad wasn't buying it. He pulled out more papers. Bank statements. Transactions. Proof that Jake had been moving company money into personal accounts, funding his lavish lifestyle while the business bled cash. And then Dad hit him with the real bombshell. Tell me about Mom's medical fund. The room went dead silent. Jake's face drained of color. For context, Mom had been sick before she passed. Dad had set up a fund to make sure she got the best care possible. Jake was the one handling the payments. Or at least he was supposed to. Dad pulled up bank statements. Thousands of dollars missing. Money meant for Mom's hospital bills had gone straight into Jake's personal account. While she was dying, he was out there buying designer suits and taking Sarah on luxury vacations. Sarah let out a shaky breath, covering her mouth. She looked genuinely horrified. Guess she didn't know about this part. Jake tried to talk his way out of it. I was going to pay it back. Dad slammed his fist on the table. She was dying, Jake. You stole from your own mother. I felt something burn. In my chest. I already hated Jake. But this was a whole new level. And the best part? He had no way out. Dad turned his laptop around, showing security footage from a luxury hotel downtown. The night Mom passed, Jake and Sarah were there, dressed up, drinking champagne, celebrating. Meanwhile, I was sitting in that hospital room holding Mom's hand saying goodbye. And Jake? He didn't even show up. Sarah had tears in her eyes. Maybe for the first time she realized exactly who she had chosen. But it was too late for regrets. Because Dad wasn't done. This is my will, he said, holding up another document. Everything goes to your brother. The business, the house, everything. You get nothing. Jake looked like he'd been punched in the gut. Sarah gasped. You can't do that. We'll fight it. We'll get lawyers. Dad laughed. A deep, bitter laugh. You mean the lawyers I already talked to? The FBI agents who are very interested in all this fraud? Yeah, go ahead. Try it. Jake was shaking now. He turned to me, his voice pathetic. Come on, man. You can't let him do this. We're brothers. We can fix this. I leaned forward, looking him dead in the eyes. You stole my wife. You stole from our parents. And you think I'd help you now? Jake's mouth opened, but no words came out. Sarah was already gathering her purse. She knew it was over. Dad crossed his arms. Both of you. Get out of my house. And don't ever come back. And just like that, Jake and Sarah were done. Jake's downfall was quick and brutal. Once Dad exposed everything, there was no going back. The first thing to go was his job. Dad didn't just fire him. He made sure Jake could never work in finance again. He contacted all their business partners, letting them know exactly what kind of person Jake was. The company's reputation was at stake, and Dad wasn't about to let a thief tarnish everything he had built. Word spread fast. The construction world is a tight-knit community, and suddenly nobody wanted to be associated with Jake. His contacts dried up overnight. The big shots he used to schmooze with stopped answering his calls. His so-called friends vanished the moment they realized there was no money left to leech off him. The bank wasn't far behind. Turns out, when you're funding a luxury lifestyle with stolen money, you don't actually own anything. The fancy condo, the designer suits, the Mercedes, everything was repossessed within weeks. He and Sarah had to move into a small, rundown apartment on the other side of town, a far cry from the high-rise penthouse they once flaunted online. But the real fun started when the FBI got involved. See, Dad had been thorough. He didn't just expose Jake to the family, he handed over all the financial records to the authorities. They launched a full-scale investigation, digging through every shady deal, every fraudulent transaction. The evidence piled up fast. It wasn't just company funds. Jake had been embezzling money from multiple sources, moving it through fake accounts, using shell companies to cover his tracks. Except he wasn't as smart as he thought. The FBI traced everything, and before long they had more than enough to press charges. The day the feds showed up at his apartment was poetic justice. Katie heard about it first. One of her friends works near their place and saw it all go down. Jake trying to act like it was all a misunderstanding, Sarah standing in shock as agents took his computers, his files, everything. I didn't even have to lift a finger. He had done it all to himself. And Sarah? She didn't last long. The second things started looking bad, she bailed. Filed for divorce the same week Jake got arrested. Changed her last name back, wiped their photos from social media, tried to distance herself from him completely. She put on this whole act pretending she had no idea about the fraud, claiming she was just an innocent victim. But the FBI wasn't stupid. They found emails, messages, proof that she had helped Jake cover up transactions, move money around, play the role of the perfect wife while knowing exactly where their luxury lifestyle came from. They charged her too. Not as severely as Jake, but enough to ruin whatever future she thought she had. She went from posting about extravagant vacations to living in her parents' guest room, waiting for her court date. Meanwhile, Jake was sitting in a holding cell, realizing that for the first time in his life, there was nobody left to bail him out. Then came the trial. Jake's lawyer tried everything, plea deals, bargaining, anything to reduce his sentence. But there was too much evidence and the judge wasn't feeling generous. Fraud, embezzlement, financial crimes stacked against him. The stolen medical fund money hit the hardest. The court didn't look kindly on a man who stole from his dying mother. They sentenced him to 15 years. The look on his face when the verdict was read? Priceless. I didn't attend the sentencing. I didn't need to. But I heard about it. Heard how he broke down when they put the cuffs on him, how he finally realized that this wasn't just some temporary setback. This was his life now. A week later I got a call. A number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the best of me. When I listened to the message, I almost laughed. It was Jake. From prison. His voice was different. None of the arrogance, none of the bravado. Just desperation. He sounded broken, like a man who finally understood the weight of his actions. He mumbled an apology, said he never meant for things to go this far, that he regretted everything. Said he thought about Mom every night in his cell. I deleted the message without responding. A few days after that, his lawyer reached out. Wanted me to write a character statement for Jake's appeal. Something about family, about second chances. I blocked the number. Jake had used up every chance he ever had. Meanwhile, my life? It had never been better. The company thrived now that there were no more missing funds, no more shady deals. I took over the financial department and for the first time in years, things ran smoothly. Profits went up, morale improved. Even Dad looked lighter, like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. He started talking about retirement, about finally taking a step back and letting me run things. Katie and I got closer. She visited more often, bringing her kids over to play with Lumi. My niece was obsessed with her, always bringing her new toys, trying to get her to wear tiny hats. Lumi tolerated it, barely. I bought a new house. Nothing over the top, just something comfortable, something mine. A place where I didn't have to be reminded of the past. It had this huge window in the living room, perfect for Lumi to sit and watch the world go by. She spent hours there, judging the birds, acting like she owned the place. And honestly, she did. One day, out of nowhere, I ran into Sarah. Downtown at a coffee shop. She looked different. Not in a good way. The confident, put-together woman who once thought she was better than me? Gone. She looked tired, older. She froze when she saw me, eyes flicking between me and the woman I was with. I didn't say anything, just made eye contact for a second before turning back to my date, acting like she didn't exist. And that's when I saw it. That flicker of realization in her eyes. She finally got it. She wasn't special. She wasn't the love of my life. She was just a mistake I had outgrown. I walked away without a word. That was the last time I ever saw her. As for Jake, he's still in prison. Last I heard, he wasn't doing well. Turns out, the guy who always acted like he was untouchable doesn't do so great when he's actually powerless. Sarah tried to move on, but her name was still tied to his crimes. No high-end lifestyle, no new rich guy to leech off. Just a small apartment and a reputation she couldn't shake. Funny how things work out. I used to think revenge meant getting even, taking something back. But now I know the best revenge is just moving forward. Being happy. Being free. And letting them rot in the mess they made for themselves. Sometimes karma does all the work for you. I didn't hear from Jake again after that last call. No more voicemails, no more desperate messages, no more pleas for second chances. He faded into the background, just another convict serving his time. Every now and then, Katie would hear whispers about him from old acquaintances, how he wasn't adjusting well inside, how the arrogance that once defined him had completely crumbled. Turns out, being a big shot in the real world doesn't mean much when you're locked in a cell. The last update I got? He got into debt with the wrong people on the inside. Guess even in prison he couldn't stop himself from making bad deals. Fitting. Sarah tried to reinvent herself. She moved back to her hometown, changed her name again, and did her best to disappear. She scrubbed the internet of her connection to Jake, pretended like none of it had ever happened. But people don't forget. No matter how much she tried to clean up her image, there was always someone who remembered, always someone who knew the real story. The last I heard, she was working an average job, living an average life, stuck in a cycle of mediocrity, the one thing she always feared the most. She had cheated and lied her way into what she thought was a better life, only to end up worse off than where she started. Meanwhile, things kept getting better for me. The company thrived under my leadership with steady growth, smart investments, and none of the shady accounting tricks Jake used to pull. Dad finally retired, officially handing the reins over to me, and for the first time in decades he could actually relax. Katie and I got even closer, and she became my Real rock through it all. Family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up, who stays, who proves they're worth having in your life. She proved that over and over again. Lumi, of course, remained the real boss of the house. She took full advantage of our new place, claiming the best spots, judging me from her perch by the window, and making sure I never forgot my place in her kingdom. She even had her own chair at my office, a little plush throne where she could supervise my work. Some days I'd catch her staring at my computer screen, looking deep in thought, and I'd joke that she was secretly running the company. Honestly, she probably made better financial decisions than Jake ever did. Then one afternoon, while sitting on my patio with Lumi curled up beside me, it really hit me. I had won. Not in a petty, vengeful way. Not in a way that required me to do anything drastic. Just by surviving, by pushing forward, by building something real. Jake and Sarah had tried to take everything from me, to tear me down, to erase me. But here I was, stronger than ever, while they were stuck in the wreckage of their own choices. In the end, I didn't need revenge. Life had taken care of that for me. Because sometimes the best payback isn't getting even. It's just living well, being happy, and knowing that the people who try to destroy you have to watch you succeed from the shadows, knowing they'll never be part of it.